We're calling all writers, storytellers, and creators of tales of the paranormal and supernatural. Do you have a spine-tingling story that's too chilling to keep to yourself? If the answer is yes, then wherever you are in the world, the Haunted UK Fiction Podcast wants to hear from you. Whether you're a published author, an aspiring writer, or someone with a natural gift for storytelling, this is your chance to share your work with a global audience of listeners who crave the eerie, the unexplained, the otherworldly. We're looking for original fictional short stories or novellas with strong paranormal or supernatural themes. Your stories can be suspenseful, mysterious, atmospheric, terrifying, thought-provoking, even darkly magical. If your story is selected, we'll professionally narrate, record, mix, and master it into an audiobook-style format, then feature it on the show. You'll get a copy of the finished production to use however you like, and you'll retain full ownership of your work. There are no fees, no contracts, and no hidden jargon. Your story deserves to be heard. Whether it's a tale that's been haunting your notebook for years, or maybe something that you're finally ready to unleash, this is your chance to bring it to life. To submit your story for consideration, email us at hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. And don't forget to follow the show on Instagram at hauntedukfiction. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome, dear listeners, to Haunted UK Fiction, a sister podcast to The Haunted UK, which features original flash fiction, short stories and novellas with paranormal themes. All stories you will hear were written by a collection of talented writers, authors, and storytellers, both independent and professional. In today's Haunted Holiday episode, we'll be reading a chilling story titled The Hollow Rooms, which was sent in to us by Ian Harris. Ian grew up experiencing paranormal events firsthand, occurrences that still happen to this day some 3 decades later. His real-life accounts can be found on the Haunted UK podcast, episode 62, titled 30 Years and Counting. Ian's strong empathy skills and uncanny ability to sense people's energy and moods before even speaking with them, along with local folklore and legends, have inspired his writing. So, get comfortable, grab a little something to sip on, perhaps cuddle up under a blanket to offset the chills coming your way, and let's dive into the first part of this story. Chapter 1. Arrival. The snow began just after sunset. It wasn't the gentle drifting kind, the sort that made towns look like Christmas cards. This was heavy snow, whipped up by mountain winds, falling in thick sheets that blurred the road and turned the world into a white wall. The tires of the SUV groaned against the icy asphalt, and Ian tightened his grip on the wheel, leaning forward as though his body alone could force the vehicle up the serpentine incline. The mountains loomed around them in shadow, pines bent under the weight of snow, their branches clawing against the wind. The headlights cut across rock walls that jutted close on either side, slick with ice, and every turn threatened to send them spinning off into the ravine below. In the passenger seat, Liam sat with his hand resting on Ian's thigh, a steadying weight. He didn't say anything for a long time, and Ian knew it wasn't because he was nervous about the road. Liam had always been like that, calm, quietly observant, waiting for Ian to voice his own fears before soothing them. "Almost there," Liam finally murmured, his voice soft but certain. Ian forced a smile, though his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "You've been saying that for the last hour." "Because it's true every time. Each turn gets us closer." A muffled yawn came from the back seat. Grace, their 8-year-old, was curled beneath a knitted blanket patterned with stars. Her head lolled against her brother's shoulder. Oliver, 2 years older, had the stubborn posture of a boy determined not to fall asleep, even though his eyelids sagged. The tablet in his lap had long since powered down, leaving only the reflection of the headlights across the screen. "Are we there yet?" Oliver asked, though the words slurred with drowsiness. "Nearly," Liam said before Ian could answer. His hand gave a gentle squeeze against Ian's leg, as much for reassurance as for affection. The hollow rooms should be right ahead. A Christmas palace in the mountains. Oliver gave a tired snort. "Weird name for a hotel." "It's supposed to mean something poetic," Liam said. "Like echoes of old rooms or voices in the halls. You'll see." Grace stirred, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't like hollow things." Ian glanced into the rearview mirror. Her eyes were still half shut, unfocused with sleep, but her tone made his stomach knot. He wanted to reassure her, but before he could, the road rounded one final bend, and the hotel appeared out of the storm. The hollow room stood on the crest of the mountain like a black crown. Its roofline bristled with chimneys and spires, and a row of narrow windows glowed amber through the snow. The building looked too tall, too narrow in some places, too wide in others, as though it had been built and rebuilt by many different hands across different decades, patched together into something that defied logic but demanded attention. A long drive curved up through wrought iron gates, their bars twisted into the shapes of roses and thorns. The children roused fully as Ian steered the SUV through the gates. The crunch of snow under the tyres echoed strangely, louder than it should have been, as though the sound had been swallowed and thrown back by unseen walls. The hotel's front doors, tall and arched, framed by garlands of pine, swung open before Ian even stopped the car. 2 figures stood waiting in the golden glow of the lobby. Ian cut the engine. The silence that followed pressed in on his ears, heavy and absolute. For a moment, he simply sat there, staring up at the building through the windshield. The snow clung to the glass in thick lace, and the hollow room seemed to loom closer with every second, as though it were bending down to peer at them. "Daddy?" Grace's small hand touched his shoulder. "We're here, right?" He shook himself and forced a smile. "Yeah, Pumpkin. We're here." The air inside was colder than it should have been. That was Ian's first thought as they stepped into the lobby. Despite the great chandeliers that hung from the ceiling, despite the crackling fire in the enormous stone hearth, the air wrapped around them with the chill of a crypt. The light glowed warm and golden, but it stopped short of the walls, leaving the high corners in shadow. The 2 figures who had been waiting were staff members, a man in a black suit with a gold watch chain and a woman in a grey dress buttoned high to her neck. Both were pale in a way that spoke of years indoors, but there was something else. A stillness in their faces, as though their smiles had been painted on and dried there. "Welcome to the hollow rooms," the man said, bowing slightly. His voice was low and smooth, like polished wood. "You must be the Morgan family. We've been expecting you." Liam stepped forward, always the braver of the two when it came to strangers. "Yes, a reservation under Liam Morgan? And this is my husband Ian, and our kids, Oliver and Grace." The woman handed them brass keys, the metal icy cold against Ian's palm. Her fingers trembled slightly as she passed them over, though her smile never faltered. "4th floor," she whispered. "But don't linger in the halls after midnight." Ian looked up sharply. "Excuse me?" But the woman had already turned away, disappearing into a side corridor so swiftly it seemed she had dissolved into the shadows. The man in the suit gestured towards the grand staircase, its banister carved into curling vines and roses. "The bellboy will bring your luggage. Please enjoy your stay. Dinner is served in the main hall at 8. With that, he too was gone, vanishing behind a door that closed soundlessly. For a moment, the Morgans stood alone in the vast lobby. The fire crackled, snow hissed against the tall windows, and from somewhere deeper in the building, faint but unmistakable, came the warped scratch of a gramophone beginning to play. Their suite was on the 4th floor, at the end of a long corridor lined with portraits. The paintings were not the cheerful landscapes or winter scenes Ian expected in a holiday hotel. These were the portraits of people, families, couples, single figures, all dressed in styles that span decades, from Victorian gowns to the 1920s tuxedos to the sharp suits of the 1950s. Each frame was gilded, each canvas dustless, as though freshly painted, and every set of eyes seemed to follow them as they passed. Grace pressed close to Ian's side, clutching her rabbit doll. "Daddy, they're watching." "It's just the way they painted the eyes," Ian whispered back, though his own skin prickled. "They follow you no matter where you stand." Their suite was large, with high ceilings and tall windows that looked out over the storm. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, strung with silver tinsel and glass baubles that shimmered in the lamplight. The fire had already been laid in the hearth. The children ran immediately to the tree, Oliver exclaiming over the ornaments, Grace touching the tinsel with cautious fingers. But when Ian closed the door, he felt it in his bones. The warmth here wasn't right. The walls seemed to hum faintly beneath his palm, and when Grace ran her hand along the carved panelling, she frowned. "Daddy," she said softly, "it's warm, like someone was just standing here." Ian laughed, but the sound felt brittle in the air. That night, long after the children were asleep, Ian lay awake beside Liam, listening. The storm had died down outside, leaving the silence even deeper. He should have felt peaceful. Christmas Eve in a grand old hotel, the children safe, Liam's hand curled against his chest. But instead, his mind picked at the oddities. The cold lobby, the pale faces, the woman's whispered warning. And then, faint at first, the music began. Scratchy, distorted as though from an old gramophone. Not a Christmas carol, not anything festive, but something darker. An organ piece, slow and twisted, notes bending into each other until they clawed at the edges of the mind. Ian sat up, heart pounding. The music came from the corridor. He glanced at Liam, who slept deeply, his face softened by dreams. Not wanting to wake him, Ian slipped from the bed, pulled on his robe, and opened the door to the hallway. The corridor stretched long and silent, lined with its endless portraits. The music grew louder as he stepped out. He followed it, each note echoing strangely, until he reached the landing of the grand staircase, and froze. The garlands of pine that had adorned the banister earlier were gone. In their place hung black streamers, frayed and drooping. At the base of the stairs sat a carved pumpkin, its grin twisted, its candle burning low. The air smelled not of pine and smoke, but of damp earth and mildew. Ian's breath clouded in front of him. His skin crawled with the certainty that he was not alone. Somewhere in the shadows beyond the firelight, something moved, and the music kept playing. Chapter 2. The First Slip. Ian stood at the top of the grand staircase, his robe clutched tight around him, staring down into a lobby that no longer belonged to Christmas. The shift had been subtle at first, the kind of thing that made you question your memory. A garland gone, a smell out of place, but now, staring at the streamers of black crepe and the leering pumpkin at the base of the stairs, Ian knew with a bone-deep certainty that something impossible had occurred. The hollow rooms had changed. The golden chandeliers still glowed, but the light looked weaker, tinged with orange as though reflected from fire. The portraits along the walls seemed to lean forward, their painted smiles sharper, their eyes glittering like wet stones. The air pressed cold against Ian's lungs, and the warped music from the gramophone grew louder, scraping against the silence until it filled every corner. He descended a few steps. Each footfall echoed, too loud, as though the walls themselves were listening. When he reached the lobby floor, he noticed other things. The pine wreath above the fireplace was gone, replaced by a withered bundle of dead flowers tied with a black ribbon. The fire itself burned lower, sputtering though he hadn't heard it die down. The glass baubles on the tree had cracked, each one bearing a hair-lined fracture like an eye about to burst. And then, at the far end of the hall, he saw them. Children. They stood in a cluster near the ballroom doors, their faces obscured by masks. Paper skulls, a jack-o'-lantern, a witch with a pointed hat. Their costumes were faded, moth-eaten, the cloth hanging loose on their thin frames. None of them spoke. None of them moved. But he knew they were watching him. Ian's throat went dry. "Hello?" His voice cracked against the silence. "It's late. You shouldn't—" The gramophone scratched, the needle jumping, and the children vanished. Not ran, not drifted, simply gone. One blink and they had been erased from the space they occupied, leaving the doors yawning open behind them. From beyond, a draught spilled into the lobby, thick with the smell of smoke, damp leaves, and something metallic. Ian staggered backward. His heel struck the stair, and for a moment he was sure he'd tumble. But then Liam's voice cut through the haze, sleepy and sharp at once. "Ian, what the hell are you doing?" Ian spun. Liam stood at the top of the stairs, hair tousled, eyes heavy with sleep. The robe around his shoulders was half-tied, and the flickering light, he looked achingly human, achingly safe. There was— Ian stopped, looked around. The garlands of pine were back, the pumpkin was gone, the wreath hung green and full above the hearth. The fire blazed warm and steady, and the baubles on the tree glittered whole and unbroken. The hollow rooms had shifted again, just as quickly as it had changed before. Ian's pulse thundered in his ears. He looked back at Liam, his mouth dry. "I thought I heard something." "Music?" Liam's brow furrowed. "I thought I heard it too. In my dreams. Some kind of organ. Scratchy." Ian swallowed hard. "Yeah, that's it." Liam padded down the stairs, his bare feet silent against the carpet. He slipped his arm around Ian's shoulders, guiding him back toward the suite. "Don't overthink it. Old buildings creak, old heating systems make noise. It's nothing." But Ian's heart knew better. As they returned to the room, Ian glanced over his shoulder at the portraits lining the hall. He swore, just for a second, that one of the painted children smiled wider, as though sharing a secret. The morning brought sun. Snow glittered across the mountains, dazzling in the pale light. The storm had cleared, leaving the air crisp and sharp. the kind that filled lungs with frost. Ian could almost believe the night before him had been a dream. Oliver certainly did. He tugged on his boots with eager hands, already begging to explore. "Can we go sledding? They said at the desk we've got a whole hill out back, and hot cocoa after." Grace was quieter. She sat at the window seat, chin resting on her knees, her stuffed rabbit clutched in one hand. "It's different now," she murmured. Liam knelt down beside her. "Different how, love?" She didn't answer. She only pressed her forehead against the cold glass, eyes fixed on the glittering world below. Ian felt the knot in his stomach tighten again. They spent the morning outside, and for a time it was easy to pretend everything was normal. The hill was steep and powdered with snow, and Oliver whooped with joy as he hurtled down on the sled, tumbling off into drifts that swallowed him whole. Grace laughed when Liam pulled her along on a small sled, her cheeks flushed pink against the cold. Even Ian let himself laugh when he fell face first into a snowbank. For an hour, they were just a family on holiday. But when they returned to the hotel, Ian saw something no one else seemed to notice. The snow on their boots melted into the lobby carpet, soaking into patterns of roses and vines. But the water didn't simply vanish. It darkened the fabric into shapes, streaks of black that looked too much like hands reaching upward, clawing for escape. And when he looked up at the portraits, he swore every figure had shifted. Their painted bodies leaned forward, their eyes wide with hunger. That night, the music returned. This time, Liam heard it too. They both sat up in bed as the gramophone's scratch filled the air. The melody the same warped organ piece as before. "It's not just me," Ian whispered. "No." Liam's hand found his. "Stay here, I'll check." "No." Ian's grip tightened. "Not alone." So together they stepped into the hall. The lights flickered, the portraits leaned, and at the far end of the corridor, where it bent toward the ballroom, a shadow moved. Too tall, too thin, its limbs bending at wrong angles as it disappeared around the corner. Ian's heart lurched. He thought of Grace's whisper at the window. It's different now. They followed the music, and when they reached the ballroom doors, Ian realized he had been right to fear. Because beyond those doors, it was no longer Christmas. It was Halloween. Chapter 3. The Masks in the Ballroom. The doors to the ballroom gaped like a mouth of some ancient creature, spilling out a draught of air that reeked of mildew, smoke, and candle wax. Ian hesitated at the threshold, his fingers laced tight through Liam's. The space beyond wasn't simply dimmer than the hotel should have been. It was transformed. Halloween had replaced Christmas in the span of a heartbeat. The chandeliers that had hung with wreaths of pine and crystal baubles now dripped with cobwebs, their light warped and orange, as though filtered through flames. Tables were draped with tattered cloth, their silverware rusted, their glasses clouded and cracked. Pumpkins leered from every corner, some freshly carved, others sagging with rot, their candles flickering with a sickly glow. And on the dance floor moved the guests. They drifted in pairs and clusters, their shoes tapping softly against the warped parquet. At first glance, they looked like people in masquerade costume, witches and devils, skeletons and phantoms. But as Ian's eyes adjusted, he saw the truth. The masks were not worn, but fused, grown into the flesh. A jack-o'-lantern face split open to reveal teeth within. A skull mask melded with skin so tightly the bone looked real. A paper devil's smile stretched impossibly wide across a face that should not have been alive. None of them spoke. Their mouths moved in silent laughter, silent screams, Silent conversation, but no sound came except for the gramophone's endless scratch and the occasional hiss of candlelight. Ian's hand tightened on Liam's. "We should go back," he whispered, but Liam's gaze was locked on the crowd, his expression caught between horror and fascination. "No, wait. Look!" There, in the far corner of the ballroom, 2 children stood apart from the dancers. Their masks were simpler than the others. A paper witch's hat too large for a small head. A jack-o'-lantern painted sloppily onto a brown paper bag. They held hands. Grace and Oliver, or what looked like them. "Daddy?" Grace's voice carried across the room, but it was flat, as though replayed from a broken tape. "Come dance with us." Ian's chest constricted. "No," he whispered, though his lips barely moved. Oliver's voice followed, too bright, too eager. "Don't be scared. We're having fun." Ian tried to pull Liam back, but Liam took a step forward. His eyes were wet, his breath unsteady. "It's them," he whispered. "It has to be. They're asking for us. It's not them." Ian's voice cracked. "It's not. Look at their faces, Liam." But Liam didn't look. He kept moving forward, drawn by the voices of children he could not abandon. The crowd shifted as they approached, dancers gliding aside to let them pass. Their masks turned, each face following Ian and Liam with that same too-wide hunger. The gramophone screeched as the needle jumped, a shrill sound that rattled Ian's teeth. Grace and Oliver, or their shadows, stood perfectly still. The closer Ian came, the more wrong they looked. Grace's paper hat didn't sit atop her hair, but grew from her scalp like a twisted horn. Oliver's paper mask clung to his skin, the painted grin stretched too tight. Their hands were not clasped in innocence, but locked together, fused by strands of black tar that pulsed as though alive. Ian stopped just out of reach, his throat burned with the need to scream. "What do you want?" he forced out. Grace tilted her head. "A family." Oliver's grin split wider. "Stay with us. Forever." The gramophone's needle tore free of the record with a shriek, and the entire room collapsed into shadow. When Ian opened his eyes, he was on the floor of their suite. Liam sprawled beside him, both gasping for breath as though they'd been drowning. The fire burned steadily in the hearth. The Christmas tree glittered. Grace and Oliver lay asleep in their beds, innocent and still. Liam sat up, pressing a trembling hand to his forehead. What the hell just happened?" Ian stared at their children, at the rise and fall of their small chests. His body shook with cold. "We slipped," he whispered. "The hotel. It pulled us somewhere else. Some other time, some other—" He couldn't finish. The memory of the ballroom clung to him like ash. Liam's eyes flickered to the children, his voice breaking. "Was that really them, or was it—" "I don't know." Ian's throat ached. "I don't know." For a long time they sat in silence, the only sound the steady tick of the mantel clock. Midnight had passed. Christmas glittered in their suite, but Ian knew, with the certainty of a man staring into an abyss, that the hollow rooms would not let them rest. And the next time the slip came, it might take more than just their breath away. That brings us to the end of The Hollow Rooms Part 1. We truly hope you enjoyed the first portion of this terrifying tale. Stay tuned to the Haunted UK Fiction podcast for Part 2, and more of Ian's stories in future episodes. Ian's contact information can be found in the show's notes. If you have an original story that would send a chill down our spines and you would like to submit it for review, simply send it in to hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. That's hauntedukfiction hotmail.com. Until the next time, stay safe and take care.